You are listening to the Happiest Lives podcast with Jill Lillard, episode number 71.
Welcome to the Happiest Lives podcast, where you'll learn to think better, feel better, and become the woman God says you already are. Here's your host, Jill Lillard.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Happiest Lives podcast. And today we start a new series. We're going to talk about defensiveness. Defensiveness is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, according to John Gottman. There's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And so these are actually what he calls the predictors of divorce. Now, these four horsemen are going to happen in any relationship from time to time. It's normal to see those. But if they are frequent, and depending how intense they can be the downfall of your relationship, especially contempt. Once contempt sets in, it's really hard to come back from that. And so you want to be aware if these four horsemen are having a prominent role in your conversations. And so I wanted to just focus on this one horseman called defensiveness. And maybe it came up for me because I was realizing that I was finding myself a little defensive these days. There had actually been a few situations in a row, and I found myself kind of getting emotionally flooded and getting very passionate and defending myself. And so I actually want to look at one of the recent scenarios. So I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you here. And actually through the process of the podcast, I'm going to sort through this situation by actually talking to my family, who I had my defensive episode with, and seeing what their perceptions are. So before we get into that, to introduce the topic, defensiveness is when our self-esteem, our belief, or our action, something we did or didn't do, feels challenged. We are perceiving some sort of threat. We may feel criticized. And when this happens, we may find ourselves feeling defensive. And even more than feeling defensive, we may find ourselves becoming defensive. And this is an effort to protect our self-image and avoid feeling vulnerable or inadequate. We might become defensive, which is evident in our words, our emotional expressions, and our body language. So throughout this series, I am going to process through a specific situation. This is what I encourage you guys to do, rather than talking about a problem in generalities, to get really specific about one incident. Now, the one incident may not seem like that big of a deal, but a lot of times when we talk about something specifically, it will generalize itself. But when we just talk about it in generalities, we may not feel like we're making much progress. We may just keep spinning in the same circle. And so we use a process inside the Happiest Lives where we do a heart scan. We learn how to expose, renew, and engage and press on. And part of that exposure is using the self-coaching model where we take the problem, we take something specific that happened, and we break it down into 5 parts. We look at what are the facts? What am I making those facts mean? How does that make me feel when I think that? What are my actions and what is the result? And so with a recent incident that happened where I felt defensive among a lot of other emotions, I sat down this morning and I broke down the parts to see what was happening. And so the circumstance was we were on vacation and we were on the shuttle heading to the airport, and my family was in the shuttle and there were a few other people in the shuttle as well. And I posed the question, what were your favorite things about this vacation? What did you like and what would you do differently? Now, this is how my brain works. I like to evaluate experiences to think, okay, what are the things I loved about this? What do I want to repeat? And what would I do differently? Whether that is good or bad, that's how my brain thinks. If I eat at a restaurant, I like to think, oh, what did I love about this experience? And if I was the restaurant owner or the waitress, what would I have done differently? And so I asked this question and I listened to people's answers. And then I shared my answer about the things that I really liked about the vacation, but the things I would change. And one of my comments was, yeah, I think I realize I like things a little bit more bougie. Now, I don't know what my kids heard what they thought when they heard the word bougie. It did seem to trigger them, but I'm going to find out. And I will share that with you on a future episode in the series. The circumstance was they had words. They started making comments about my comment of what I would change. So my thoughts were, when they were making comments, and I'll keep it very neutral and factual as far as that goes. I actually don't even remember what they said, because I think I got so triggered because I was thinking, no one's understanding what I'm trying to say. I'm being ganged up on. They're attacking me. I didn't do anything wrong, and I don't understand what's happening. My feelings were defensive. I felt misunderstood. I felt alone, confused. I even felt defective. Like, is something wrong with me because I like things a little bit more fancy, luxurious? Maybe they thought I was being pretentious or materialistic. And so it made me feel maybe even a sense of shame. My actions were to try to explain myself. I was fighting for my opinion. I decided to myself, you know what? I can't trust them to share my thoughts and feelings because everyone's getting really reactive to what I said. And I also got embarrassed by the conversation because there were some other people in the shuttle. And so I kind of just stopped engaging. And the result is, to this day, I still don't understand what happened. I still feel very confused about it. And so what I'm going to do, I plan this week to sit down with each person individually and ask them to share with me their perception of what happened. What were the facts? What did they think? What did they feel? What did they do? And what result did they create? And so I'm going to show up and I'm going to listen because I really want to understand what happened according to their perspective. And maybe that will be helpful in deepening my understanding so that I can grow and I can learn from that situation. So what does defensiveness look like? Defensiveness can be a verbal response. It can be a nonverbal response. It can be an emotional reaction. And so some of our verbal responses might be to justify or explain. We might give a lengthy explanation to defend our actions or our opinion. And that's what I felt like I was doing. I was trying to explain myself, even though I really don't even know what they were saying. It may be to blame. We may shift responsibility to other people to avoid the criticism. We might go into denial and refuse to acknowledge any fault or actions that we took. We may even question the other person. We may have a counterattack, responding with questions or criticisms about the other person instead of addressing the issue at hand. We might have emotional reactions, so irritability or anger. We might become visibly upset, raising our voice or showing signs of frustration. And I think maybe that's what I tend to do. I tend to get very passionate in what I'm thinking or what I did. And I probably visibly look upset, even though I'm thinking, I'm not upset. I'm just passionate. I'm just trying to explain. I'm trying to understand. So I think I might talk a little faster. We might withdraw. Our defensiveness may turn into stonewalling, where we shut down the conversation or we physically distance ourselves. We may have nonverbal cues, some body language, like crossing our arms, closing off our body, indicating that we're uncomfortable, that we're defensive. We might avoid eye contact, look away. We might bat our eyelashes nervously. We may frown, scowl, or other negative facial expressions. And another thing we might do is we might change the subject, redirect the conversation to a different topic entirely. So why do people get defensive? Well, if you feel like you're being criticized or judged, it is a natural response to protect your self-esteem and avoid feeling inferior or inadequate. If you, in general, tend to be an insecure person, you're insecure about yourself and who you are, your abilities, you might react defensively to mask those vulnerabilities. Maybe you've had some past experiences, previous experiences such as being unfairly judged or criticized, and this can lead to a heightened sense of defensiveness. Defensiveness can also arise from miscommunication or misunderstanding. When we make assumptions about the other person's intentions, this can lead to a perception of threat when no threat even exists. People may become defensive when their core beliefs, their values, or their opinions are challenged as they're closely tied with their identity. And I think lack of trust, if you don't trust the person you're interacting with, you might be more prone to defensive behavior. So what can we do instead of becoming defensive? I know Gottman always says it is better to say that you're feeling defensive than to become defensive. So you can acknowledge the emotion, but be able to pause it rather than reacting from it. And I think being able to maybe even take a break, a time out from that conversation and figure out how you want to move forward with that. So number one is to pause and breathe. Take a moment to breathe deeply and calm down before responding. I think being able to say to yourself, okay, I am feeling defensive because I am thinking that I'm being attacked. I'm thinking that I'm being unjustly accused. And then pausing that, just recognizing that I'm having a thought and it's creating a feeling for me. Recognizing that you're feeling defensive and identifying what might be triggering this reaction can be very helpful. And then being able to focus on what the other person is actually saying. As I said, I have no idea even what the words, when I tried to write down the facts, I don't even really know what my kids were saying about my comment. And maybe that wasn't even the comment that got them. I'm really actually kind of curious to find out what happened there because, as I said, I feel kind of confused about it. And I think it's because I felt triggered and got emotionally flooded. When we can listen and focus on what the other person is saying without interrupting and show genuine interest in their perspective, we are then able to deepen understanding. Now, you might not be able to do that in the moment, right? I wasn't able to do that in the moment. I didn't do that in the moment. I was able to hit pause, acknowledge what was happening, and then take some time to process through it. I would like to go back and actively listen and ask some clarifying questions so that I can understand the other person's points of view by asking them some questions to make space to understand it from their perspective. And being able, when you have those conversations, to use I statements to express how you feel and why. For example, I feel hurt when it seems my opinion is misunderstood. Being able to take responsibility for your actions, acknowledge any part you may have played in the situation, and show a willingness to engage constructively. So to own your actions in a situation. Seeking common ground, look for areas of agreement or shared goals to shift the focus from the conflict to collaboration. So what is it that we both agree on? What is our goal that we're sharing here? And being able to empathize, put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand their feelings or motivations. And there may be some situations where you need to set boundaries. You may suggest a break if the conversation becomes too heated, and then revisit it later when both parties are calmer. And then after the conversation, reflect on what triggered your defensiveness and how you handled it so that you can learn and grow and make improvements for the future. And so as I sat down and processed through this situation, I also created a new intentional model. And so I didn't like this result that I don't really understand what happened. And, quite honestly, if I wasn't doing this podcast, this might be something that I just move forward with, that I didn't pause and go back and want to reflect and have a conversation with. I probably would have said, you know what, it wasn't that big of a deal. But because I've seen this happen a few times, I want to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And so the result I would like is that I engage in positive conversations with my family. So the circumstance is the same, that I shared an opinion and they had words. They had opinions about my opinion. That would be the circumstance. I said words. They said words. I realized what I need to do if I was getting that result, instead of clinging so tightly to the need to be understood or the need to be right in the situation, I needed to give that up, to let that go. and not argue, defend, or explain myself. If it doesn't seem like you're in a conversation and people are listening and it feels argumentative, then I don't want to continue to have a conversation like that. So I'm glad that I did discontinue that conversation because it did not feel productive. It didn't feel good. And so being able to just kind of hit pause and be willing to have a conversation, but not when I'm feeling like I'm just having to defend or explain myself. If I am trying to engage in productive conversations after the conversation, then I would do what I did, which is ask myself what happened. I would do a unintentional model, break it down to the 5 parts, see what happened, and I would do a new intentional model. And then I would instigate a conversation with each person individually to ask their perspective of what happened and listen to understand, and then ask if I can share my perspective. To be able to show up in that way, I would have to feel clear. I would have to be clear-minded. And I have to ask, what is my thought about that situation that makes me feel clear? And the thought I came up with was one that I learned in Love and Logic, one of the parenting books that I read years ago when my kids were younger. And the thought is, I love you too much to argue. So I love them too much to argue. And I love me too much to argue. I love us too much to argue. And when I'm thinking that I love us too much to argue, I'm going to feel clear and I'm going to stop arguing. I'm going to take a pause, a time out. I'm going to give myself time to reflect on the situation, own my actions and what happened, and then initiate a calm conversation. And the result is I engage in productive conversations with my family. I want to have conversations that we can deepen understanding, that we can learn, and we can grow from. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you guys will join me next week, and we're going to talk about assuming the best in the other person. I'll see you then. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would love to help you take this concept and apply it. Join me in Clarity and Courage, my cost-effective coaching program for Christian women. Each month, receive the tools you need to apply the concepts and grow. We will meet on a live coaching call where you can ask me anything. Plus, you get access to the worksheet workshop where you can have conversations with other women just like you. Learn more and sign up at myhappyvault.com/Clarity and Courage.